Today we have a crazy story of revenge on a daughter's bully. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, I sabotaged my cheating wife's career to get back at her. I found out that my wife and partner of over 4 years was being wholly unfaithful in our marriage. And to top it all off, she wasn't being the slightest bit discreet about it. But unknowing to her, I'd already found out as my curiosity got the better of me. And even after I'd found out about this, I was too complacent to even do anything effective about it, as this was something that really bothered me for the longest time. But along the line, I was able to steel my resolve and finally get my crap together, all while basically concocting one of the most petty revenge ever. And I must say, it was worth every single moment of it. Till this day, she doesn't know that what happened that day was all my doing, and I'd been planning the entire charade for the past few months and all. Let me give you a little backstory on my life and that of my wife. I, male 31, and my wife, female 27, had been married for not the longest time to be honest, but then I would say that we got married when we were relatively young. And looking back now, I guess you could say that in today's society, it would seem as if we'd both hindered one another from truly enjoying all that life had to offer, before choosing to settle down for life with one another. But then this wasn't the case with the both of us, as I was definitely sure of the fact that I was madly in love with her, and that there was nothing that was going to change my mind about how I felt about her, and this was the reason why I got married to her. My wife, let's call her Maria, and I met while the both of us were still young college undergraduates. We both had different majors, and this was one of the reasons why we couldn't have ever possibly met. However, there was a particular incident that just so happened to make our paths cross. So back then in college, there were usually college parties that were thrown majorly by students. Some were on campus, with the permission and under the supervision of the school's authorities, while others were thrown outside of the school's premises. And these ones were usually the more intense ones, as they usually lasted longer, and there were lots of explicit activities to engage in. I guess this was why most people usually preferred to always turn up for the parties that were being thrown outside of the school's watchful eyes and all. Oh yeah, and also, there were usually some substances that were in circulation in said parties and all. So basically, I usually only ever attended parties that were thrown on the school's premises. And this was something that my friends were against, but then again, it wasn't like they could force me. When I had decided to finally try something new, they were so excited as they promised that I would have the time of my life and all. I was still doubtful at the time, as I promised then that I would only engage in what I felt comfortable with, and they were all satisfied with that. And so with that, I was prepared for the party. I was just missing the one thing, which was a partner to go with. This was kind of an issue for me back then, I'm not going to lie, as I was never one to have such close relations with the ladies of my age grade at the time. To be honest, I found out that most of the ladies that I seemed to have an interest in at the time were either uninterested in me, or they just weren't into guys, if you know what I mean. So at some point, I kind of just gave up at some point. And then on this day, I was left without any options whatsoever, and then that was when my friends came in clutch, as they said that they had someone that was willing to go along with me as my second. Apparently, this person in question was someone that was in the same shoes as I was, and to them, this just seemed like the perfect opportunity to link us up with each other and all, and so that was how our meeting was made possible. Only through the efforts of my friends, all just to make me have the time of my life. Anyways, fast forward a little bit, I'd already gotten to the party and I'd met this person that was supposed to be my second. And I must say, she was even more stunning than every other person that I could lay my eyes on at the party. Although we were obviously coming for a frat party and all, she had the most eloquent look. And her persona definitely did not match a party like this. I couldn't believe my eyes as I was staring while introducing myself. She did the same, and that was when I realized that she was also not the kind of person to frequent parties such as this one. We talked for quite some time, and when we realized that things were already getting way beyond what we signed up for, she was already opting out of the entire party and asked if I could take her home. And seeing as I also wasn't up for anything they were doing back in there again, I decided to take her back to her place, and we had a really nice moonlit walk back to her place, as the distance back to our respective dorms wasn't that far. It was within walking distance. After seeing her off for the night, I got her contact information, as I wanted to continue the conversation we were having that night at another time, and it seemed like she too was rather interested in continuing the conversation, and I must say, this made things rather easy for the both of us. Moving on, after that day, it was evident that we both enjoyed each other's company very much. So much so that we were even meeting each other at any free time either one of us had. She became an integral part of my life, as she usually helped me out whenever I needed, and as expected. I was also there for her whenever she needed me. I found myself slowly but steadily falling for her, and it wasn't until I was asked by my friends the relationship between myself and Maria. This was when I quite literally froze. I couldn't answer because there was no response to that particular question. It then struck me that I had genuine feelings for her, but for some reason, I had not acted upon these feelings. And after spending quite some time with my friends, I resolved myself to come clean with how I truly felt about her. And this was no easy conclusion to come to, but I was ultimately able to do so, and I must say, I wasn't expecting her reaction, as she said that she too felt the same way as I did. It truly was one of the happiest moments of my life at that time, as it really seemed like things were going quite seamlessly and effortlessly for both of us and all. Anyways, after that very day, we both resolved to get into a relationship with the both of us, and things were quite good between us, as we basically had quite an in-depth understanding of each other, and alongside that, family and friends alike were totally in support of our relationship. Then right after college, we both came to the life-changing decision of moving in together with each other, and although things were really difficult for us, seeing as getting a job immediately after we had graduated from college was seemingly impossible as time went on, we were later able to find stronger footing in secure, well-paying jobs, which enable us to properly fund our lifestyles and all. Now, from this point onwards, this was when things had started to get albeit serious, even though we had always been serious with things in our relationship. At this point in our relationship, I had already decided that it was time I popped the question to her, as there was nothing more I was waiting for. I already had the woman of my dreams, and it was certain at the time that she was the one that I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. I couldn't think from a whole other perspective at the time, but it's now seeming clearer to me that at this time, things between the both of us were quite rushed at this point in our lives. My reason for coming to this conclusion was as a result of the analysis on the fact that we had only known each other for less than 2 years, and we had the connection of a couple who have been together for the longest time. I guess it was just because we felt like we were quite compatible with each other. Anyways, this didn't hinder me at the time, as I still got married to her at the proposed time period. And in under 1.5 years of getting married to each other, we were finally expecting our first child, which was also one of the fondest memories I had with her, as this was the joy of every married couple. In time, we were already preparing to welcome our first child, as this was after a long pregnancy period of a little bit over 10 months. But then, thankfully, she was successful in delivering our bouncing baby boy. And then from that moment forward, I guess that's where she had a definite change of mind, as it was from the moment where our son was capable of ingesting proper food and not reliant on his mother for sustenance that I was already beginning to notice some distinct changes in her attitude, behavior, and character towards our son, and most especially towards me. And this was just another whole 1 year and 8 months after bringing our son into this world. It all began when she would come home late from work and engage in all sorts of manners of extra activities after work time, all while forgetting that she had a husband and a child waiting for her back at home. I was her husband, partner, and most of all, her best friend. Or so I thought, and every time I tried to sit her down and reason with her on this matter, she would always flare up and try to make the entire matter about me being controlling and not wanting her to live her life the way she saw fit. At this point, I left her to her vices, as I wanted to see where this would lead. And after seeing her several times being dropped off at home by this particular co-worker of hers, I couldn't help myself and I had to go through her phone without her knowing. And when I found out what was really going on between them, I was short of words. I was quite literally heartbroken. I didn't know what to do for weeks, as confronting her seemed like the wrong decision at the time, as I put our son into consideration and what a broken home would do to him. And that was when I decided that instead of leaving her, I was going to make her regret her actions, without her knowledge, as this felt like the most effective. And so I found out that she was up for a major promotion which was meant to be good for us, but then I took it upon myself to sabotage this by tweaking a few documents and paychecks which were under her supervision. Basically, that was the end of her career, and it's not something that I should be proud of, but then it was just a means for me to enact a semblance of vengeance for the feeling of betrayal I was feeling. I made sure she didn't know I was the one. And also, after that day, she was no longer interested in anyone outside of our marriage, except for myself and our son. I hadn't forgiven her fully, but what I did had proven to suffice. And that was enough for me. So all I have to say about this story is even though OP put their partner in a position where, they don't have enough freedom or resources to go out and really find somebody, that doesn't mean that they're not going to turn around and try to cheat right away again sometime. I feel like OP seems almost a little too secure with things. Also, hi, I'm Steven, and if you guys enjoy crazy stories of revenge, it would be amazing if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to my podcast. That said, our next story is Anika the Bully. The experience of having a bully is not something that I would wish upon people who have even wronged me in the slightest bit, way, form, or manner. However, the same could not be said in my case, as I was the one being bullied, and the one whose entire high school life was basically ruined as far as I was concerned, even though it wasn't as bad as people thought it out to be. This is my story of how I was seriously bullied back in high school by a group of girls, all led by a singular individual, Anika. Anika, female 18, and I, female 20, had quite literally nothing in common with each other, meaning there was practically nothing that really brought us together on the same level. This is not implying that I was a level above her or anything, but it's simply stating that she was quite literally levels above what I could possibly imagine. And I'm saying this for a fact. I mean, her father was the head of the Parents Teachers Association and also the biggest donor to the school's productivity. So much so that lots of infrastructure on the school's premises were named after her father and all. Anyways, myself on the other hand, I was just a regular student that was as basic as they came. I was introverted, which also meant that I had little to no friends around me at the time. Not like I wanted a friend at the time anyways. The only thing that really made me stand out amongst all my peers at the time was the fact that I just was a little bit older than every other person around. In fact, I was not only a little bit older, I also didn't look my age, which gave me this really matured look. It seemed like I was a proper adult by the time I was a year away from graduating from high school. And one would think that this wasn't even in the slightest bit a problem, but then this was apparently wrong in so many ways, as this obviously made me a target for Anika and her friends. Till this day, I still cannot seem to fathom the reason as to why I was being bullied, as I know for a fact that I'd never crossed anyone's path. Back then, when I was in high school, I always kept to myself, and there was quite literally nothing I did that would have made me stand out more than I needed to. I guess the only thing that really made me well known throughout the entire school was the fact that I was basically the oldest student in the school. And also apparently I was very good looking. Seeing this, I would surmise that this really triggered Anika and her friends, but majorly Anika, because every single one of the students in her friend group were all just basically her lackeys. Anyways, the bullying all started during lunch break one fateful day. I had no idea at the time that the table I was sitting on was reserved for Anika and her friends only, and no other student was to sit there. This was something I subconsciously knew prior to that day, but unfortunately for me, I had been having quite a day at school that day and I was paying little to no attention to my surroundings, and I found myself sitting on her table. I was wondering at some point why everyone kept staring at me, as I just wanted to be left alone. I thought I was invisible to every other person, as such was the way I was being treated. But then something just seemed off, and then that was when she appeared right behind me. Apparently she'd been standing there for a while, and the sight of seeing a calmly enraged Anika and an unsuspecting me was more than enough for people to keep staring. I honestly had not the faintest idea as to what was happening until she placed her hands over my shoulder and asked in a menacingly calm manner what exactly it was that I was looking for right there on her table. And when I realized what exactly was happening, she, and her group of friends had already taken their respective seats at the table, and the only person left standing was Anika. And then she asked me again, this time on a more serious tone than she did before, what exactly I was doing on that table, and why, for some reason, she was still the only one left standing. This was when I fully realized what was going on. But then I didn't think much of it, and I immediately apologized as I took my things away. But I guess the manner in which I apologized was not good enough for her, as she felt disrespected. Then this was when her switch flipped, and then she tripped me first off, which ended up with me planting my face flat on my leftover lunch. I felt so embarrassed, but then there was nothing I could have done except pick myself up and carry on with my day, but this still wasn't enough for her, as she was still determined to make me feel all the more embarrassed and eventually learn my place. After that fateful and unforgettable day, I tried my best to avoid her as best as I could, but this was practically impossible, except I was willing to skip classes, which was an apparent negative at the time as we were both offering the exact same classes. This made life for me all the more stressful, coupled with the fact that I still had to cope with classes and all that, and still find time to be alone, to have my personal time. After that day, I got regular visits from Anika and her friend group, which always seemed more like she was just trying to assert dominance in front of the entire school, and she was practically untouchable at the time. So even if I were to have taken the matter to a teacher or even the school's director, it would have made little to no difference. So there was nothing I could have done at the time except to take as much bullying as I possibly can. And even when I couldn't anymore, I would still take more than I could handle, as I had convinced myself that this was the best option. Anyways, some weeks after, almost leading to months, we had a new transfer student all the way from the United Kingdom. This particular re-transfer student at the time was particularly famous amongst every female student, even before his arrival, as he was exceptionally good looking and had the most refined mannerisms and even appearance. He was quite literally every single girl's Mr. Dreamy, and I was no exception. I never knew that this was when things were going to get even worse for me, as at the time prior to his arrival, Anika had been excused from school activities, as it seemed like she had a family emergency of the sorts to attend to, out of the state, and even the country. And this wasn't a problem, obviously, for her at the time, so during her time away, there was practically a free pass for every single girl to make possible advances at him at the time. And I was definitely no exception. Things went on like this for a while, and when I realized a different method of approaching this matter, I just decided to play the waiting game, with the hopes that he was probably going to recognize me, probably from afar or something, and thankfully he did, as he had approached me one day right after we were done with a particular class and asked if we could study together. He noticed I was the most attentive in class, and I probably understood what exactly it was that we were doing. This felt like I had finally accomplished something in my entire time of being alive. It seemed too good to be true, as of all the other people in class he could have chosen, he chose me. I truly was honored. We had a separate session immediately after school, and this was just us, or rather myself, trying to explain to him things that he found confusing and practically tutoring him in a more simpler sense. And we really understood each other. Things went on like this for a while, and when about an entire month had passed, we were already that much closer to each other. He would invite me over to his place on some weekends, and we would basically just chill and all. Nothing much was happening, but after having a break from Anika and her friends, it was really nice to catch a break and just enjoy something for once in a while. But this didn't last for long. Almost like she was informed of what exactly was happening back in school by her friends, Anika rushed back to school the following week, as she claimed to have nothing else to sort out back at home again. And this was when my whole world practically crumbled right before my eyes, as upon her arrival, she first sought to assert her dominance by attempting to take Thomas, this was the name of the exchange student, for herself, which honestly seemed absurd, as Thomas was a person who could think for himself, and he actually turned her down as politely as possible, which flipped her switch again, leading to myself bearing the full brunt of what happened. So what she did was, she publicly humiliated me in front of Thomas and basically laid claim to myself being her direct underling, and after Thomas saw the way that I was being embarrassed, harassed, and humiliated, he simply just shied away from relating with me, as apparently that was too unsightly. I couldn't believe what was happening. This was by far the most embarrassing moment of my entire life, as I was practically humiliated in front of the entire school, and particularly in front of the one person I had ever had a crush on, who I felt had something for me too. This was basically the end of my life as a high schooler, as by the time the new session was commencing, I didn't think I had the stomach to resume back in again, and I just opted to engage myself in something that would be profitable for me on the long run. and seeing as I had a latent talent for cooking, baking, and basically any and every culinary activity, my father, after realizing what had happened back in school, decided that since I wanted to follow my passion, he was going to enroll me in one of the best culinary schools around, as this was albeit the only option left for me, and I was totally open to that. As the years went by, I studied and practiced as hard as I could, as this was the one thing that I made sure that I must be good at. And also, it was stated that by the end of our program, the top graduating student was going to receive a referral and their very first professional client. This really got everyone hyped up right from the get-go, and I can proudly say that after 4 complete years of hard work and serious determination, I came out on top of every other person in my class. In fact, I did exceptionally well that I even got referrals from various top chefs in my school. But the best part was yet to come, as the very first professional client I received was none other than Anika. I couldn't contain myself. I was filled with varieties of emotions, but none was stronger than anger. I needed to quell this feeling, and the only way I thought of doing so was by making the event her family was hiring me for one that she would never forget. Basically, an explosive one, if you will, and this wasn't something that needed me to think too hard on, as I just needed to conjure a little contraption that was meant to make the cake blow up right in her face, seeing as it was her birthday and all. Also, that and the entire cuisine for the occasion was intentionally prepared poorly, with some elements of disgust in the mix. I was bothered about the fact that I might have jeopardized my career that was just on the verge of kicking off, but I had to do what I had to do. And I must say, I'm sure she had one heck of a blast at her birthday party, because either was chaos all through. I mean, is it truly a birthday party if at the end of it you're not scraping birthday cake residue out of your eyeballs? For what it's worth, exploding cakes aside, I've never actually had it happen to me, but I've always hated the idea of people smashing other people's face into the cake. Not only do I think if it were me that had that happen, I would find it not funny at all, I'd also probably be pretty ticked off that you wasted the cake. I'd be that party goer that shows up and I'm like, oh cool, I can't wait to have some of the cake, and then watch the other person's face get smushed into it and go, oh cool, I guess that's off the table. That said, our next story is, I found out my daughter was getting bullied by an old friend's daughter and took action. It all started when I, 27-year-old female, moved to a new city with my husband. We were newlyweds about to start our marriage journey together, so we chose a quiet suburb to relocate to in New Jersey. My husband worked for a multinational company in New York City, but got promoted months before our wedding. He was asked to oversee a branch of the company which was located in New Jersey that also influenced our movement. My husband made enough to care for us both, so there was no need to work at the time. Out of boredom, I decided to take a stroll on a quiet afternoon and came across a clothing store. I went inside with the intention of getting something for myself and saw the owner of the store. I asked about her opinion on a dress, and she was very honest, which I loved. She and I got talking, and from there, we became friends. I became a regular companion of my friend Patricia, which was how I noticed she was a person full of life and was always cheerful to those around her, but kept her personal life private, which I understood and respected. Most of our meetings were either at her clothing store during the week or my house during the weekends. Before I knew it, she began to slowly let down her guard and was more open to talking to me about things, which was how I got to know she moved to the city about a year ago with her husband and recently became pregnant with her first child. She was about 2 months pregnant at the time, so it wasn't too obvious. I congratulated her and I was genuinely happy for her. It had been a difficult year for her and her husband since they've been trying to have a child for so long. Patricia and I discussed a lot of things from our childhood to list of ex-boyfriends, high school crushes and mistakes and many other things. It was a lot. One very day, we were talking about our lives before getting married, and I told her I worked as a baker for a while before moving, and she brought up an idea about me renting the shop next to her since it had been vacant for a while now. At first, I waved the idea off, but thought about it later and it seemed like a nice idea. I was always bored inside, I had no kids to take care of, and it wouldn't hurt to bake again. I missed it. I told my husband, who agreed to it. He was a simple man. Whatever made me happy was fine by him. Patricia and I got into work. She called the agency, and before we knew it, I had all the necessary documents needed to start my store. Patricia must have been about 6 months pregnant when I found out about my pregnancy. I was working on renovating the store and getting all the necessary equipment I needed to start up, so I was a bit stressed, but I was excited to officially start my business, and I was going to be a new mom. Patricia was overjoyed when she heard the news. She kept going on about how our kids would be twinning and all. Patricia was so cool about the whole baby thing. She kept hoping my kid would be a girl so she could spoil her with clothes from her store. She gave birth to a baby girl 3 months later. Not too long after, I got scheduled for my ultrasound. My husband and I found out we were also having a girl, and I remember being excited to share the news to Patricia. She was so happy for me despite having her hands full with a new baby. I was mostly at her house helping her out with her baby since she needed the help, and it was good practice for me. I officially started my business a year after my daughter was born. Business was slow, mainly because I wasn't really acquainted with anyone on the street. Patricia did her best to introduce me to some of her customers, and she was so helpful and sweet about it. She always comforted me whenever I had doubts about the business and tried to cheer me up. It wasn't like I was desperately in need of cash. I just didn't want to feel like a failure after going through so much to build up the bakery, which was why I started learning new techniques of dough and pastries making online and practicing during the days while Patricia took care of the kids. She really was the sweetest. Business started picking up slowly as I began to incorporate new ideas into the business. I baked and supplied bread to grocery stores around, and things were turning out better than I'd imagined. The workload was so much I barely had time for myself and my kid, so Patricia and I grew a little distant with one another. I didn't realize how bad the situation was until about 6 months later. I tried to reconnect with my friend, but it seemed like she'd moved on to a new circle of friends. I was so desperate to make things work, I began to make efforts to move closer to her sets of friends. I really tried to fit into these women's world, but it was like I was living a lie and it wasn't me. It felt like I was the only one making efforts to keep our friendship going when Patricia was over the whole thing. So I just decided to call it quits and focus on my work and family. That is life, I guess. When my daughter turned 3, I found out my daughter was a bit too interested in letters and drawings and arts. She enjoyed learning about new things and was constantly always asking questions. My husband and I decided to test her out and found out she was hyperlexic. We did our best to be supportive of her and encouraged her to be herself, and as far as I was concerned, she had a good relationship with her age mates, and she was an easygoing kid, so I wasn't really worried about anything. My daughter was 6 when she came with a letter requesting I give my approval by signing so she could enlist for an inter-school competition, which took place every year with her school being the host of this year's competition. My daughter never asks for anything, so when she came with a letter looking so excited, I couldn't deny her an opportunity to do something she loves. I did my best to help her out studying because I knew how much she wanted to participate. Since it was a competition, they cut off the losing team at each stage and it kept getting more and more intense. What I wasn't prepared for was my daughter to suddenly drop out of the competition by herself. I knew how much she wanted to win a medal, so I was shocked by this. I kept interrogating her about it, but all she said was she wasn't feeling it anymore and she didn't seem upset about it. That passed and she seemed fine, but I couldn't help but be a little suspicious about her reasons for suddenly dropping out of the competition, but there was nothing I could do about it. Then came the silent treatment phase where she would come back from school and not say a word while we were both at the bakery. She wasn't exactly talkative, but she always talks about her day and what she enjoyed doing the most. Then I noticed how Patricia's daughter, let's call her May, came by often to say hi to her, and I thought, oh, they must be friends in school since they're just one class apart from each other. Her mom never came by, but that didn't mean anything. I wasn't going to stop her daughter from coming to see her friend. Maybe her new formed friend was getting her attention. I hated that my daughter grew distant with me, but if she had a new friend, there was nothing I could do about it. May came by so often looking innocent. I was actually happy to see both of them together, till I eavesdropped on one of their conversations and heard May threatening my daughter not to say a word to anyone about something that happened in school, or else she would be punished by her at school. It was then I knew my daughter was getting bullied. I went towards that little devil and grabbed her by her fist, dragging her towards her mother's store, who looked surprised to see me and told her about her daughter's misbehavior. Of course, that was when May decided to keep up the innocent girl act and started weeping that I was lying against her because I didn't want her to be friends with my daughter. I was beyond shocked at how good a 7-year-old was at lying, and I didn't care if her mother chose to believe me or not. I warned her to tell May to stay away from my daughter and left her store. I asked my daughter how long it had been going on, and it turned out May wanted to win the competition so bad, she pretended to be friends with my daughter and pleaded with her to drop out, but still ended up unable to win. Ever since then, she said her good girl act stopped and she threatened her and bullied her in school. I wasn't going to have it, and I sure as heck wasn't just going to let my daughter become a plaything of a little girl out of control, so I told my daughter to make sure she defended herself when someone tries to attack her. She makes sure no one messes with her because she looks weak. To be honest, I expected Patricia to be doubtful of what I said, but what I didn't expect was a lawyer at my front door telling me I was getting sued for false accusations and threats against Patricia's daughter. If she was going to involve lawyers, then I sure as heck wasn't going to stand by and look. So before I went all out on Patricia and her daughter, I went to confront my daughter once again and made sure she wasn't lying before involving myself fully into the matter. I also knew someone like May must have been mean to different people, so I got into investigation mode and went to my daughter's school to ask girls in May's class about her, and sure enough, I was right about her. I knew the students were too scared to confront her and corroborate to my story, so I went to their parents and asked for their assistance so as to keep a healthy school environment for their kids who have been a victim of May's bullying. They were all happy to help and got the principal involved and aware of May's actions. A meeting was set up by the principal where we were all gathered, including Patricia and May. We all tried to explain to Patricia that her daughter's bullying was getting out of hand, with each parent having something to say, but she supported her daughter till the very end and said we were all liars ganging up against her daughter. She went as far as calling me an ungrateful witch who she helped build her career and said I was paying her back by being a backstabber. I returned her insults by telling her I was disappointed in her for being ignorant and gullible. What surprised all of us was how good May was at denying everything she did. Even when there was evidence against her, she still couldn't bring herself to tell the truth. She was eventually expelled from the school, and her parents left the street not too long after. I never meant for things to get so bad, but I would not stand and watch my daughter get bullied for no reason. I think it's for the best that everybody kind of ran them out of town. If they're the type of people that are not willing to admit they've done something wrong to the point where they will leave the town or the city before ever actually owning up to it, all those kids and all those adults are getting spared big time not having them around anymore. I just say good luck to the next sorry sack of people who get stuck with them. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. Now, if you want to hear another absolutely crazy revenge story, check out that video on the left. Or if you missed my latest video, check out that video on the right. That said, I'll see you all next time with some more stories.